So the South San Francisco's Commission on Racial and Social Equities meeting is called to order. Roll call, please. Edith Arias,
Here.
Jeff Asopardi,
Here.
Gladys Balmas,
Here.
Norm Faria,
Here.
Mike Futrell,
Here.
Jessica Ibasan, Vanessa McGovern, Hermes Monzon, Pat Murray,
Here.
Mark Nagales,
Here.
Kyla Powers,
Here.
Liliana Rivera, Bobby Vaughn, Andrea Fernandez, and myself. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I know that the Spanish translation did not work well as expected the last meeting. So hopefully this time it will be a better translation. Our IT is working very hard, so thank you for our staff making sure that we include everyone in this discussion. So please do not be disheartened. Let us know how it goes. Before we also begin, I would like to inform everyone that our city, in cooperation with Lions Clubs and the Masonic Community Outreach, is going to have a free flu shots to all, no insurance or documentation required. It will be held on Saturday, the 7th, and Sunday, the 22nd, from 10 to 3 p.m. at the City Hall parking lot. So if you would like to register, there is a link at www.ssf.net flu shot. Just a quick toast to long live democracy and to everyone who participated by voting yesterday. Everyone who dared have spoken, and we will live with the consequence of our decision. Back to our meeting today. I want everyone to know that this will mark the end of our phase 1, the information gathering or learning phase. I am aware that some have expressed impatience in the progress we are making. However, an English playwright, John Haywood, summed it all. Rome wasn't built in a day. I encourage everyone to be patient, as important work takes time. Our mantra should be policy, systems, action. You cannot simply act without the infrastructure to support and the policy to make the action sustainable. We are all invested in our city's future. Next phase is our identification of the best option or options for South San Francisco, and it will be a collaborative process. To allow more time for our breakouts, we will proceed. I hope everyone had a chance to read the minutes of the last meeting, and I will entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded. It was been moved by Mike and seconded, was it Norm? That the minutes of the last meeting be approved. So everybody who would like to approve, please click the raise hand feature in your participants section. I'm not seeing it on mine. I don't know why.
Yeah, I can't raise my hand, but I'm using
I
a
can't either.
computer.
Don't have chat.
It's not there.
I'm approving.
How about you
I'm
can
in
do the
favor.
Any
Who's
objections?
opposed?
hearing none? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it has been moved and seconded that the minutes of the last October 7th meeting is now approved.
Madam Chair, before we move on, may I make a quick announcement?
Sure.
To also let folks know that tomorrow the city and the county are hosting a free COVID testing on Linden Avenue. Begins at 8 a.m. You can pre-register at ssf.net, or you can just walk up. No documentation is required. That's not what this is about. But we are targeting in particular the Latinx community because they have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So we'll have free COVID-19 testing tomorrow on Linden in Old Town. And I will say it is the saliva test. So it is not the big Q-tip that you might have seen on television. So please pass the word. If anybody passes by and sees it, we'll start tomorrow at 8. Also, if I could, Madam Chair, just to dovetail on your comment about moving slow, I will say that it's not true on everything. The very first meeting, we talked about embedding mental health professionals to respond to 911 calls. Just today, I received the memorandum of understanding with the county to start a pilot program in South San Francisco, where we will hire a mental health professional to respond to 911 calls. So that has actually moved pretty fast since our first meeting in August. And the city attorney is going through the MOU, and I plan and hope to bring that to our city council for approval at the end of this month. And then we will get to the business of hiring someone who can answer mental health calls. That is a true mental health professional. So that to me is a real win with this commission, and one of the initiatives that wanted to fast track from our first meeting in August. So thank you for allowing me to pass that on.
Thank you, Mike, and that's great news for us. Will that person be a city employee, or that will be an employee?
No, technically a county employee under their Department of Health, but the city and the county are splitting the cost, and this person will actually be stationed in South San Francisco so they can respond to calls that may require their help. And when they're not responding to calls, they'll be working with our homeless population and providing preventive mental health for those residents that we know might be on medication or other proactive measures. And we think it'll be a benefit, but it is a pilot. So cross your fingers that it works as well as we hope.
Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to working with them, with him, her. So I'll turn over the floor to Kim.
Thank you.
Hey, Maria, can you speak a little bit louder? They were saying that they have a hard time hearing you.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone, and yes, Paige.
Sorry, Kim. Daniel was speaking to Maria for the Spanish translation, not for you. So your volume was okay.
Got it. All right. Well, really happy to see everybody here today. Thank you so much for joining us and for being here, taking your time to work on these really important issues. We have a packed agenda today, and with that, I will go straight to the goals. We have crafted today's agenda so that we are able to gather commissioner feedback on example approaches, which we'll be able to break into small groups and have a chance for commissioners to talk with each other. And then we'll also, after each group, small group, we'll have an opportunity for public input and public comment. And that is the other main goal today. So we'll have 2 small groups and 2 public comment input periods. And the result then will take to phase 3. So specifically in terms of our agenda, we'll begin with a grounding exercise, and I'll hand it over to Sharon Watts, who's part of our consulting team, shortly. We've decided to postpone number 2, the presentation on themes from commissioner and public comments and survey results, because we wanted to open the survey, the community survey, up again. We have some links for folks to invite additional community members to participate in the survey. So we'll be presenting those findings on December 2nd. So again, what I wanted to just review briefly is we'll have an opportunity to discuss the approaches on the first half of approaches in our small group breakout number 1. Then we'll have public comment, then we'll have commissioner response, and then the second half of the approaches in breakout number 2, followed by public comment and commissioner discussion. Okay. So again, a couple reminders. We want to make sure that public comment, that folks know when they'll be able to participate. As a community member, we'll invite folks after the small groups. And again, we have 2 public comment periods. We're going to be trying to hear from as many folks as we possibly can. So we'll ask folks to speak for about a minute, and then they'll be muted again. Or you're invited also to email us at the email here. And as Commissioner Nicholas mentioned, we are at the end of phase 1. So the intent behind today's meeting is really to take a step back, to look at all the information and approaches that we've talked about so far, have a chance to hear from you, the commissioners and the public about those approaches. And then in phase 2, we'll have an opportunity to prioritize which approaches really best meet the needs to address racial and social equity in South San Francisco. And then phase 3 is finalizing the implementation plans. So we've been very busy with each of the topics, reviewing all of the key topics that are related to racial and social equity. And today, again, is an opportunity to take stock of everything that we've talked about so far and have an opportunity to hear what others have to say about those approaches as well. As a reminder, we have our group agreements focusing on our common goal, building and strengthening partnerships and community relationships, being open to new ideas and perspectives, and this will definitely come into play in our small groups, and then participating and being self-aware. So with that, I'll invite Sharon Watts to begin our grounding exercise.
Good afternoon, commissioners. So as Kim said, tonight we are really thinking backwards. We're going to take stock on all of the information that has been presented over the previous meetings. It's been a lot of information, and for the most part, it has moved really, really fast, and we've had some difficult topics to wrap our minds around to address some very critical issues here in South San Francisco. So as we think about participating and being self-aware as one of our group agreements, let's think about one of 2 questions. I will call on each commissioner to answer either of the questions. The first is, what was the first time you were aware of race? Or what was your experience like the first time you had a teacher who looked at you? As you think about these responses, think about also what's driving you to this critical work and this team that has been built to address race and social equity here in South San Francisco. So I'm going to give you time to take a deep breath and pause into your response. And the first commissioner that I will ask is Chair Nicholas. Choose one of these questions and give us a response.
Sure. I was born and I grew up in the Philippines, and so therefore it's mostly Filipinos that I have interacted with. When I went to Manila and started my college courses, then that's when I have interaction with a lot of international students. And, talking with fellow Filipinos, of course, they have their own beliefs about different races, but gradually as I get to learn different races, different nationalities of people, I found out that the core of it is we're all human, we all are the same. And so that was when I was aware that we all belong to the human race, although we may look different.
Thank you, Chair Nicholas. Next, I will ask Commissioner Patricia Murray to respond.
Hi. So the first time I was raised in a pretty diverse family, so I've always been aware of race. But if you wanted to change that a little bit and say the first time that that I was aware of privilege actually has been just in the last couple of years when it's been brought up. My family is still fairly, well, is very diverse, different races. And so that's not something that I was necessarily made aware of, but in terms of privilege, I can say that's something that's fairly new to me.
Thank you, Commissioner Murray. Next, I will ask for Commissioner Edith Arias.
I think for me, I want to just, as Commissioner Chair Flores said, I was born in Mexico, and I had most of my schooling in Mexico. So when I came here at 17, I think that's when the shock really come to see the difference of what race really was, because I saw the difference. I guess the attitude towards a person who doesn't speak the language, a person who's a high school student and trying to follow what I saw other students doing as going to college. So my counselor, who was white lady, she said that I couldn't apply to any university because I had just come into the country. And that made me feel really aware of the difference of who I was, and and that my language probably was at the level where I was supposed to be. Thanks to your second question, closer to an advisor who was Latino, he actually supported me in a group, support group for Latino students, and I was able to apply to 4-year universities, and I got accepted to 3. So that really made me feel like there is a disproportionate way of looking at race.
Thank you, Commissioner Arias. Next, Commissioner Norm Faria.
Yes, good questions. I would say I grew up in the Central Valley in Modesto. So, and I was born and raised on a dairy and a farm. So there was a lot of that part with those who work in the fields, a lot of Hispanic, Italians, some Asian. But when I really started becoming aware of race was when I moved to a larger city, and I went to a very diverse high school that had a mixture of Asians, Blacks, and you got to interact with their philosophies, their issues. And that's when I really started becoming aware of race and all that part, because being one of probably the oldest individuals on this commission, I remember how growing up and you'd hear a lot of the racial epithets. And then as I got older and things started to change, you got to see how unfair, unaware, and how it was actually very insultive. And so that evolved as I exposed myself to more with the demographics.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Kayla Powers.
Yeah, I'll answer the first question as well. Always been aware of race since I can remember. I'm biracial, Black and white. So like most Black people in the United States, it's something you have to learn about very early on to survive. But also being in a biracial family, I think I was like the first biracial child. Within my 2 families, it's pretty obvious when I'm the Blackest one in my white family and the whitest one in my Black family. So these issues of race have just always been pretty front and center in my life.
Thank you for sharing. Next, Commissioner Jeff, as a party.
I think for me was probably, my mom was born and raised in Spain, and she came here, and she, when I was aware, she would always speak English with us. My father did not speak Spanish, and I remember I didn't really understand her father too well because his English was really broken. And one day I just remember being young, and my mom and him were having a conversation in Spanish, and I didn't understand what they were saying. And I just kind of remember having a conversation with my mom, and she just kind of explained to me where she came from and how everything came about. That's kind of the first thing that I remember.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Commissioner Mark Nogales.
Thank you. In terms of the first question, I'd probably say when I was very young. I immigrated here when I was 1 year old, but the kind of the first memories I had was having neighbors of different races, Latino, Asian, and then their kids going with me to school in Los Cerritos and just seeing the multi-ethnic student population. It was really a great experience just to see other people, other kids from different races and just working together and growing up together. So that was kind of the first, when I realized I experienced race. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Mike Futrell.
So I have to say this exercise is a lot like growing up when I had a preacher who would randomly call on people and have them pray. It's like the lightning would strike you and you'd wake up and have to give a prayer. But a little different yet, aware of race early on, but it really, I got schooled in it when I was in college. I went to school with Donna Brazile, who you may know now from CNN and all of that. And she started the Black Student Union and I helped her with that. And there are two incidents that really just opened my eyes to the problems and what needed to get done. One is I innocently shared some information with the all-white college administrators, thinking it was the right thing to do. And she took me to the woodshed that how naive I was and schooled me on that. But we took a road trip with another Black student from Louisiana to Washington, D.C. And we stopped in Alabama. And the Black student who was a male refused to get out of the car because he was so afraid of being in Alabama. And that whole experience of working with him was the best education I could ever have on the real problems and the fear that I, as white privilege, really never have. So it was very impactful on me.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And thank you, each and every one of you, for sharing those responses. And just to kind of just sum up what I've heard, location. Our parents are often our first teachers. Our neighborhoods, our communities, how we engage with one another. Opportunities can be either limited or exponential, depending on where we are and where our status may place us because of our race. But these conversations are more so difficult from today's climate and the communities that we serve. We're able to see, even here, that our experiences are limited and we want to make a difference. So continue to hold on to those experiences, the awareness of privilege, the awareness of little or a lack of privilege, and how we can make a better South San Francisco. Thank you so much, and we'll move on to the next part of our meeting.
Sharon, there's a couple other commissioners that are here. I don't know if they wanted to answer the question.
My apologies.
No problem. So we have Commissioner Hermes and Commissioner Bobby, you have your hand up.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. Hi.
Commissioner, I'm sorry.
No, not a problem. I stepped in a little bit late, I think. The second question was interesting to me a bit because I, growing up in South City, did not have any teachers who looked like me. So it really wasn't until college that I had a professor who was Black, a Black male professor, and I was, I mean, the experience was more profound than I, and thought it would be, and he was brilliant, and flash forward, I became a college professor. He was my advisor. I mean, so it certainly had an enormous impact on me to have a teacher who looked like me, and I owe a lot of my own experience and what I've taken from life from that experience, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you so much for sharing. Kim, is there another?
Yes, Commissioner Gladys or Hermes, did you want to answer the question?
So this is Gladys. I think as an immigrant, these questions are really tricky because for me, I probably started being aware of race by seeing the people who were more disadvantaged in my own country. So we have a big Black population in where I come from. So that was probably the first time. And it's kind of difficult to answer the second question. I don't remember having teachers who were different. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Any more?
Commissioner Hermes, did you want to answer the question?
Yes, I grew up in Peru and I went to a military high school, and I had the opportunity to have classmates from people from different part of the country with different, even though it's the same country, different mentality, different habits. And that was a good experience for me to see the whole country as one. But later on in life, when really, sort of the difference on the race is when I came to the US and started working. And I saw the difference when you're a Latino, you gotta work harder. And an uncle that lived for his life here advised me before I came here that he had to work time and a half to achieve his goals. And that is came true to myself too. Whatever I achieve here, I had to raise it to be more specific to the white race. And that's still active today. At work, I can see that I have to work harder, with, which I do it with passion. But I can see that with less effort, the other race will get ahead of you, get more help.
Thank you, Commissioner Hermes, for sharing that with the group. So
I think we have, oh, sorry. I think we have one more. Commissioner
Yeah,
Vanessa.
I thought I saw Vanessa.
Yep.
I'm here. I just didn't want to interrupt. I think my first experience, I grew up in a school that was pretty diverse in Santa Cruz, and I had a lot of friends of different races. And I never noticed until my best friend, her dad was from Mexico and her mom was from El Salvador. And I remember going to a barbecue and everybody was speaking Spanish, and the food was different. Everybody was speaking Spanish. And it was the first time I think that it clicked that there was a different culture that I didn't expect, or that it was the first time that I noticed that it was a difference.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So the last response is, again, we see the importance of having someone in our community, in our educational systems that look like us. It inspires us to go on and do more. It's a supportive environment. We're able to learn about other cultures, appreciate other languages. We see that some communities and populations, people have had to work harder to achieve what someone else has. So we recognize the disparity, we recognize the work, but we also recognize some of the successes of, again, having mirrors in our communities, in our institutions of learning, in our healthcare systems. So take what we've shared with one another tonight and use that as we move forward into deeper conversations about our approaches and addressing social and racial equity here in South San Francisco. So we are going to move into part 2 of the meeting. So item 2. The survey that we started will actually be extended to Wednesday, November 18th. It is available in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. And this just gives us a greater opportunity to receive public comment, more input on the approaches from the community side, and to move forward into phase 2. Item 3. So this is where we will review and discuss the first half of the approaches to address racial and social equity. We will talk about health and social services, community safety, and policing. So we will break into small groups. There will be a report out section after we spend about 25 minutes here. Public comment will be related to the first half of the approaches and breakout. And commissioners' immediate reactions to the first half of the approaches. So there's two guiding questions we would like for everyone to think about as we're in our small group. And it's, which approaches do you think are the most important to address racial and social equity here in South San Francisco? And what do you think will be most effective to reduce racial and social inequities in South San Francisco? So while we're in the small groups, we will call on the commissioners to speak. We will have about 5 to 6 minutes in each cluster or section of each approach. But we really want to hear back from each one of you. So you may have the right to pass, but we really strongly encourage everyone's feedback in this small group. Kim, if I missed something, please feel free to jump in.
No, I think that's perfect. I think what's next is Paige is busy behind the scenes assigning small groups to everyone.
I'll just quick break before I push people into small groups. I just want to add, or re-emphasize rather, as mentioned before, there will be a public comment session. So while the commissioners will be speaking during the breakout rooms, there will be a report back briefly so that everyone can hear highlights from what the different groups discussed. And then there'll be public comment, and then it'll be back to the commissioners and then the second small group. Just to remind people, there will be plenty of opportunities to, or not plenty of opportunities, never enough opportunities, but there will be multiple opportunities to weigh in.
Thank you, Paige.
So we'll see you in the small groups.
All right.
Is this my small group?
This is your small group.
Oh, hello, small group. Nice to see you. So we were really looking forward to having an opportunity to focusing in on the approaches that we've seen so far, but having an opportunity for the commissioners to kind of grapple with all of these approaches. So I've reviewed the group agreements. I don't think I need to go over them again. So Paige, are you going to advance my slides or should I do my, you are? Okay, we're good. Okay, making sure the tech is right.
Yes.
Okay, so these are the key questions as we've talked about so far. And the idea is really to get your best thinking. There really are no right or wrong answers. But which approaches from your perspective are the most important to address racial and social equity in South San Francisco? Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to focus first on this set of approaches related to health and social services. You hopefully got the handout that we sent as part of the packet and background materials, but you've also seen these before. We've had an opportunity to review them. So just take a moment maybe and look over these. We're going to focus on 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so let's start. We have about 5 or 6 minutes for each grouping. And there's a number of them here, so we're going to have to keep moving pretty quickly. But let's start with the first comments you have. Which, from your perspective, are the most important? And I'll be asking commissioners, and then in the public comment after this, we can hear from community members.
Can I start with a quick question? Did we discuss what the essential resources would be on number 2? Just like what that meant exactly? Or is that still up for discussion?
I think that's up for discussion. And if you want to specify as part of this conversation, I'm taking notes. And so, we're interested in that. I think the idea is basic needs. So economic, food, housing, especially those impacted by COVID, right?
I just want to say what a great question that is, and super helpful, because number two, as written, would be very hard to implement. We really need to get into the community and maybe do some surveys and listen and understand what are the resources that are lacking so we can focus this effort. So I do appreciate the question. While I'm here, I'm obviously a fan of number one, the mental health team. A lot of times those, what's really a mental health crisis or substance abuse or homelessness might spin out of control if it's simply a police response, and having a non-police mental health response there, I think. But I really like number four as well, particularly the performance reviews. If you want to change the culture of any organization, make it part of their annual performance review, which is tied to promotion and salary. That makes it meaningful and not just lip service. So I do like that. They're all four great, but I understand we probably need to focus our efforts a bit.
Right. I mean, when I look at them, numbers 1 and 2 jump out to me because, well, let me take number 4. You'll probably find that just about everything I say in any of this discussion is going to be focused on what I feel is the priority, which is highlighting race specifically. And so I think the number 4, if that training is really about, issues of how to deal with race, how to deal with difference, how to deal with, the diversity of our community in specific terms, right? I'm all for that. I think that's, obviously identifying quality training in that regard is something, that will take some work, but dealing with individual level racism, implicit bias, whatnot, I think is really something that South City could be somewhat of an exemplar in that regard if it sort of goes throughout our city services.
Thank you. And Kayla, I wanted to go back to you and then maybe we'll go to Pat, but just to ask if you had some specificity or specific language around number 2 that you were imagining that would help focus that one?
Yeah, I think my question just came from, because it could mean totally different things. I could see essential resources meaning preventative and health services, depending on what the community actually needs. But if there's a more immediate basic need related to health, such as food, like that could also be impactful. So I like number 2. I just think it could use a little more specificity to make sure we're actually giving the communities what they need, both during COVID, but after COVID as well.
Thank you. And Pat, did you have anything?
Yeah, I like all of them, but number 4 jumped out at me because if we're going to make systemic change, it has to be at this level. And so number 4 is really my favorite. But, number 2 and 3, if we're talking about preventative care and providing health care for not only people of color, but people of low-income families and underserved. I mean, this, if COVID has done anything, it's highlighted the inequities there. And so I don't know. I would say first number 4 and then 2 and 3. And we're kind of working on number 1 already. So, so I'll go there.
Thank you. So I think we need to go to the second grouping. So same question. Now we're focusing on 5 through 8. So this is still in health and social services. And I will open the floor. Comments or thoughts? Maybe Bobby, can I start with you?
Sure. You know, number 7 seems to be one kind of a recurring theme that we've been hearing in terms of reducing documentation. I don't know what kind of documentation is generally asked for services, but if that's a barrier in terms of people's, you know, various, you know, immigrant status, definitely want to take that off the table. So, I mean, that's one that I like. And number 2, clearly anytime we can collect racial data, right, race and ethnicity data, it allows us to then, you know, benchmark it. It allows us to track it. It allows us to do disaggregated, you know, research to kind of know what we're doing. So I really like number 6 as well.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Kayla?
If I had to pick one of these, I would pick number 5 because like this is cross-cutting also, again, like in education as well. This is a really big theme that has been coming up, and from what I've been hearing from the youth is that this is really top of mind and exacerbated by COVID as well. And in general, I tend to prop up any of these initiatives that are investments into the community, something that, you know, is building. Bobby, not to pick on you, but I am just more skeptical on data tracking and like performance reviews if the right people aren't in place to actually drive that accountability and give the providers the resources that they need to be effective as well. So of course you need both, but if I had to
so I'm a social scientist, so
So you would be the person we would want to be doing the data collection and analysis.
Right. Where, you know, I always ask the question, you know, let's go to where the problem is. And one of the ways of identifying where the problem is to have some data that can tell us where the problem is. But you're right, knowing where the problem is, if that's where it stops, then it's like, okay, big deal.
Commissioner Murray, did you want to?
Yeah, so my thought was number 7, if we want to meet the needs of other people, then we shouldn't have documentation tied to the services they receive. And then number 6 as well, because I think that we need the data to tie our resources.
Maria? I don't know if you can hear me, but it's very hard to hear you. If you could just try not to move around so much and speak into the mic, maybe we could hear you better.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, that's better. When you move away from the mic, we can't hear you.
I didn't realize.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. So
No,
sorry.
you're fine.
Problem.
Thank you, Sharon. It's
We're
perfect.
really happy that translation is happening.
Okay, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
So first I said number 7 because I don't think documentation should be tied to services.
And then I also got down that you liked, you supported number 6 as well.
And then number 6, yeah, because I don't think, I think that we need to know where to tie our resources and to set policy. We need to know the data. We need to know where things are happening and what needs to happen.
Okay. Any thoughts on your part, Mike?
I'm going to tie into that on number 6 as well, because we will always be operating in an environment of scarce resources, and we need to measure the outcomes of what we are doing. And if it's not effective, change to something that is effective. And we'll know that if we measure it. And then that will also allow us to better utilize the scarce resources at our disposal. So I absolutely like measuring on the back end, on the outcomes, and then comparing that with our assumptions, and then adjust so that we are effective.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Paige? I think we need to go to the next grouping. Am I right? Okay. If that's okay. I'll move us to the next grouping. So now we're moving to community safety and policing. Same question. What do you feel like are the most important approaches to address racial and social inequities in South San Francisco? Kayla, I'll start with you.
Yeah, from these three, I would say number two. Reason being, in my theory of change, reducing contact is a big priority. And, you know, if there isn't a reason to engage in contact because it's a lower level offense, yada, 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 I think that could be really effective in preventing harm done by police officers to citizens or residents.
Thank you. What about you, Commissioner Bobby?
Yeah, I think I like number two as well. Yeah, that one jumps out to me as a priority.
Okay. Commissioner Pat?
I like number one, expanding community-based public safety approaches, including conflict resolution, restorative justice approaches, skill-based education. I think the police department is always going to be a part of our community. You know, a third of our police officers have gone through Cal City schools, and so they're more than just police officers that come out. They're part of our community. And I think strengthening those relationships and finding new ways of policing conflict resolution, restorative justice. That's
okay. Thank you. And what about you, Commissioner Mike?
I think number one as well, because you're including conflict resolution, restorative justice approaches. And to Pat's point, no matter how we shape it or fund it, there will always be some police presence in any city, because there are bad crimes that do fit outside of, I think, where we're thinking. Number two, I like a lot, and we'll do the research to see how much flexibility police really have for those offenses and infractions. You know, the state in particular is pretty prescriptive about what we can do. And then the other side of that, what is considered a minor misdemeanor to me, if I'm the person whose window just got smashed in their car, which is a misdemeanor, they're not going to want police to look the other way. Or if you're the business owner whose building just got, you know, tagged up with graffiti, they're not going to want police to look the other way. So that one, we need to have some sort of a community conversation and understanding of what misdemeanor offenses or infraction really are of such an inconsequential measure that we're just not going to worry about. I'd like to get there. It'd be interesting to see if we can.
Okay, thank you. Next grouping. All right, so same question. We have the last three approaches here. I'll start with you, Commissioner Pat. Or Bobby, did you want to?
No, I think I was just going to say, if number five is, if number five is sort of the idea of a civilian review board, then that's, I think, something that's absolutely necessary.
Say more about your vision there.
Well, sort of civilian review in terms of a group that the police department reports to, and is involved in policy changes with the police department. I'd have to take a look at what kind of best practices are in civilian review boards, but we wouldn't need to reinvent the wheel in that regard. And also my idea of this board or this group would be to, as it says here, would present public data to the community about what's going on with the police department, and it wouldn't be coming from the police department per se.
Okay.
I'm going to
Yes.
dovetail onto that to say I agree, Bobby, with a lot of what you said. And we've done and already started some research of what's happening across the country. And there's a wide range of, a little to a lot. Certainly providing a venue, for example, if you have a complete complaint about a police officer, the rule should not be go to the police department and make that complaint.
Right.
And this would provide a venue for that. I can absolutely see, the data and transparency. Where I have some struggle is if you want to give it the power that, say, Oakland or San Francisco have to fire police officers or fire the chief. I struggle with that going that far. And I think I would prefer to go to a middle ground to start with, get it established, have it working. If the need exists to go further, it can go further. It just feels like we'd be going from 0 to 100 to go as proscriptive as, again, Oakland or San Francisco, which in both of those cases, those police boards were imposed upon those cities by the U.S. Justice Department because of really bad systemic problems within those cities. So I recognize this topic alone, this one topic is probably worthy of an entire meeting.
Sure.
And bring in some people from around the country. That's the beauty of Zoom. We can have people just Zoom in and give us their perspective if we try to make that. So I can tell you the police are a little nervous about this one, but I am telling them I don't see any way to avoid heading in this direction. I think every city in the country is headed in the direction of some sort of a body like this. And the nuance will be, well, how much power does it have and exactly how does it work? But just having nothing, I don't think that's an option.
Okay. Commissioner Pat, did you want to add anything?
No, I agree. Number 5, from what I've read, most cities either have an advisory board like this or are moving in that direction. And I don't know what it should look like. I agree with Mike that it shouldn't have the power to fire. But, some middle ground where they're kind of an intermediary between the people and the police department. And so that's where I
Thank you. So I think we're almost at time. Is there, just looking at all of these, together, we kind of chunked them out, but is there anything now that we've talked about all of them that you want to lift up as maybe some of the more important? Because I'm supposed to report out from group 1, so you tell me.
I didn't comment on this last batch yet, but I would say.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I would say 5 is one that I would like to lift up, including all of the nuances that we've discussed. I think something good can be worked out on that one.
So it sounds like with more information about number 5, that is rising to the top of importance. And Mike,
I think it should happen. I don't necessarily need more information, but like how it's structured, we'll of course need to have more conversations with all of the relevant parties to create it, but it should happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Mike, it looked like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that a couple of these kind of cross together on the data and collecting information and sharing information. And maybe just a general comment that we should have a better and more transparent data collection system, data sharing, and then analyze that data so that all of these initiatives, we can determine if they're impactful or not, and share that with the community, whether that's through the Safety Advisory Board or otherwise. But that a few of these touch on that, so kind of a thread.
That's an interesting recommendation. So maybe, because one of the things that we're going to be doing between now and next time we come back to you is to consider what you've said in these small groups to see if there's anything that we should combine, I guess is one way to put it, if they do overlap, and And then we're going to ask you to prioritize. So
Yeah, last kind of a little question though on number 1. So it says expand one under community safety and policing, expand all of that stuff. So I don't, is that it presupposes that this is happening and it should be expanded. And I don't know if indeed is community-based public safety approaches and all that stuff, is it happening? And number 1 says to improve it, expand it, or create it. I don't have a sense for what that's asking.
right. So I think, for example, in the schools, I think to some degree, some, for example, restorative justice approaches are happening. And so the idea is maybe to expand it. I recall maybe to middle school. There was some happening in one grade level, and the idea was to expand it to other grade levels, for example, but also making sure that any of the other like conflict resolution where it might be in a smaller, happening in a smaller venue, that we would want to make it more common. So we would have to, again, research where it's happening. But to answer the question, I think all of these are happening in some places, but not as much as it could.
Okay.
Mike, did you want to add something on that?
Well, I was just saying number 6 ties in a lot with health and services, ensure training related to. The commonality there is we want to look at the current training and then see how can we make it more effective than what it may currently be. So, but I agree, the number 6 as written is a little vague.
Okay. And that you were talking about with community safety and policing.
Correct. Number 6 on community safety and
got it. Okay.
Number 4 under health and social services, which also talks to training.
Okay. Any last thoughts? I think we're about to get moved into the larger group, but I'll take any last 10-second nuggets. Well, really nice to be in a small group with you. We'll be reporting out, and then we'll be listening to public comment shortly, and then we're going to go into a second round of small groups. Hi, everybody. So is everyone back?
Everyone should be back, yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see, which small group wants to begin their summary? Sharon, do you want to kick it off? You're on mute, Sharon. We can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
That's great. Perfect.
Sorry. So for our small group, we discussed, as the rest of you, health and social services, community safety and policing. There was an overall agreement that approach number 1 was most important to think about moving forward, as well as approach number 5, invest in mental health and wellness programs to promote real safety and healing for South San Francisco youth. We did have some conversation on how those two could possibly be layered or embedded with each other, but making sure that there was a clear component for South San Francisco youth. In terms of additional language to make sure that the approach is addressing race and social equity. We talked about addressing any language barriers. We noted that we have a very large Spanish population, so we wanted to make sure that the mental health professional is able to communicate with our community. And we also discussed making sure that the financial impact was low. So for our underserved or low income families, that they were also able to access the services. And for our community safety and policing, there was overall agreement that all 6 approaches were important. However, there was strong agreement at number 3, the importance of building community, strengthening relationships, building that trust was important to move forward all of the approaches.
Thank you. Nayeli, did you want to go next?
I would be happy to. We actually didn't, we were on our last one. So apologies to my group for, I think we cut somebody off right in the middle of it, but I was in a small breakout group with chairs, with Commissioners Nicholas, Balmas, Monson, and McGovern. And the approaches that we discussed all of them, but the ones, you know, that people highlighted or lifted up with prioritizing, which is 2, under health and social services, prioritizing low-income families and communities of color, disproportionately impacted. However, there was consensus or agreement that all approaches are interconnected, especially as issues of mental health and substance use are also interconnected. There were some questions about, you know, like combining. So for instance, that approaches 1 and 2 could be combined, such as creating teams and linking supportive services. Another one that also rose up was approach number 6. Folks thought it was really important to be able to continuously review data and address disproportionality, because it's important to project the outcomes and know where disparities exist. Again, reducing documentation, approach number 7, also got a lot of support, especially as it addressing documentation concerns for undocumented communities around providing their information. On community safety and policing, approaches 2 and 3 rose up as well. Finding alternative approaches means it could be a good way to start looking forward, and as well as supporting community cohesion and community engagement efforts. And I think on our last little cluster there for community safety and policing, folks were expressing support for number 5 to establish a community safety advisory board, and that's where we left off. But it was a good discussion.
Thank you.
Kim, can I add one thing?
Yeah.
There was a very interesting point that it goes to what you guys were saying earlier, that no matter what is being done in health and safety in any of these particular subjects, it is important to look at the current processes so that whatever is being done doesn't just build on a system that has a racist structure. And so it was important to run it through that lens. And that was a great comment that came up, in addition to the other things that Nayeli talked about.
Thank you, Myra. That actually was a similar concept that was brought up in our group as well. So I think we should definitely consider how to make that very explicit in our next steps. So for our small group, I had Commissioner Bobby, Kayla, Pat, and Mike, in addition to some community members. And I think number 2 was brought up in terms of wanting to be sure we had some specific understanding about what essential resources we were talking about. There was some discussion about, you know, maybe creating a survey to find out is it food or is it health and social services access. So really wanting to drill down and understand what those resources might be. There was also a lot of interest in number 4, but also wanting to make sure that we would, if we did number 4, making absolute sure that it was focused on race and equity and racism, and kind of moving into some, again, more specific details so that the approach was very clear upon looking at it. Number 7 definitely was one of the topics that the group highlighted, so reducing documentation, which we heard with some of the other groups. And then obviously number one, we talked about as well, and just that's moving along, but also want to have some more information about that. Let's see. So in relationship to community safety and policing, there was a lot of agreement around number 5 being critical, and that's kind of a national trend that we're seeing, but also wanting to understand what the structure would be of a group like that, and maybe thinking about outlining, you know, the kind of data that would be reviewed and the kind of recommendations that could be made, but wanting some more information about what that would look like. And then also number 2 was highlighted, identifying alternate responses to misdemeanors. While challenges were raised in terms of how that would happen and the jurisdiction that we would have in South San Francisco, there was also a lot of interest. And then finally, I'll just say, because I know we want to get to small groups number 2, but there was some interesting commentary about, are there opportunities to collapse strategies? So for example, combining strategies related to data, sharing, so collecting, sharing, and analyzing data in a way that we could reduce the number of strategies, but still have that main essence as an approach. And lots of other really important conversations that we have notes on. So I thought it was a great conversation. Thanks, everybody. All right, so here we are. I think, Sharon, you were going to invite the public.
So this is our opportunity to have some feedback from our public who actually sat in or listened in to our commissioners for our first small group. You are encouraged to speak. You have a maximum of 1 minute, but we also like you to keep the same question in mind that we asked of our commissioners. Which approaches related to health and social services and/or community safety and policing do you think are the most important to address racial and social equity here in South San Francisco? So we ask that you raise your hand virtually to join the queue and be called on by the moderator for your opportunity to speak. Paige?
Yes, so there's approximately 13 community members who are with us tonight. So if you could go and raise your hand virtually, we will call on you one at a time. If you're calling in, you can dial *9. There's a few phone numbers as well. If you're on the computer or the app, then click on participants and then raise hand is the bottom right button. Give people a little bit of time to raise their hands. If no one raises their hands, we will move on. But there's, to date, always been at least a few people who wanted to make public comment.
We would love to hear what people thought about the approaches that we were looking at in our small groups. Any comment is fine. There's really no wrong answer.
Do they have the capability to raise their hand? Because,
yes.
Oh yeah, there's
one hand raised now.
Okay, so AS, just make sure that you are unmuting first.
Oh, hi, this is Olga Perez. I think the mental health services is very important for the community. Unfortunately, I know the family who, the person who assaulted the police officer on Grand Avenue, and they confided in us that they had very, very difficult time obtaining services for this individual. So I think, you know, there's especially in the Latino population, you know, there's a lack of services. And, you know, I would love to see, to try to find out what the root of the disconnect between the police department and the community. And we all could benefit from an educated citizens, you know, whether, you know, receiving education through our schools or through the community in our home grounds. I think that's very, very important.
Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. It is being noted for tonight's session as we further our discussion on having a mental health response team.
Thank you.
We invite anyone else?
You know, Kim, there was another interesting point in the breakout session that a lack of facilities and services very often causes stress and can be related to mental health issues. So I don't know if there's somebody who wants to speak to that, but that was a very interesting comment and a linkage that I don't know if we thought about.
Thank you.
I recommend, since there's no one else who's raising their hand and we have a second public comment period, that we continue.
Great. Let's get into our round 2 small groups.
Actually, before that, are we?
Oh, Commissioner's response. Yes. So we did want to just hear from you before we go into the next set of approaches a little bit more, maybe some connections you were drawing as you were listening to your fellow commissioners talk. Does anything stand out? Let's take the health and social services approaches first and think about, given the comments we've heard, given what you know, your expertise, which approaches do you feel like are the most critical to making sure that racial and social equity in South San Francisco is addressed?
I can go, Kim. We were kind of, someone mentioned about services, and I kind of mentioned in my group that sometimes we have these services, but people aren't aware of them. And it's the lack of information. And I'm trying to figure out why that happens, because I get phone calls from people that are asking about financial assistance or mental health services. And we might put it out in our newsletter, but we're not hitting the right folks and we're not alerting people about what our services are. So how do we improve with those services? I think that's a great conversation to have, is how do we make sure that the population that we're trying to reach, we're able to target them and able to give them the information that's provided.
Right, and that links to the comment that we just heard from the community member. Mm-hmm. So making sure that there's information and connection and access to right. the services that are needed.
Yeah, I mentioned a story of a woman who was homeless, who was living in her car, and some individuals got to know her and they reached out to me asking to provide some assistance, which we did. Now, she was lucky because she was able to connect with people that knew me, but for those who are homeless in South San Francisco, they might not have the same opportunity of knowing the services that we're able to provide. So, so how do we improve on that? What can we do to make sure that people know the services that we have or the county has that might help individuals in need?
Commissioner Edith, looks like you want to.
Yes, I'd like to follow up with Commissioner Mark. And I want to say that just like our public comment said, I think one of the biggest thing in South San Francisco is that we do have a large population of Spanish-speaking individuals who might not have documents. So if you think about the services, many of the times you need to show an ID, you need to show maybe a pay stub, you need to show how much you make, you need to show all of this documentation that I understand as the system many times comes from federal or state, right? But then in the reality and in our South San Francisco community, people who are residents, they live here. I know stories of a family too who lives in a garage with it's not even equipped to live, live a situation. And this single mom lives with 2 kids in school, right? And so those kind of situations, how do you, I know that Commissioner Mark is saying, how do we get to them? Well, first of all, they didn't even have a computer before this pandemic. So when you send a newsletter, when you put it in the websites, and it's distributed or put it into what would I say, maybe a flyer in certain areas, sometimes these community members don't visit those places because their day is in between 2 jobs and taking care of their families and barely making the basic needs met. So I believe that that's why number 8, with developing and expanding, promotores and peer-to-peer model is very important. And it has to be really thought out and reaching out to those members in the community who are already a bridge from the city services and from people who know these stories, right? There's people in the old town who know the stories. There's people who can really one-to-one know who they are and identify them. But then the city needs to decide how can we support them without asking all that documentation that might be needed.
Right. And I think that connects also with the community cohesion, because, that's where the peer-to-peer model and the promotores, because they trust each other. So it's very important that they trust the people. And so, like, for example, for the flu and COVID testing that we're doing, so that's why the area or where it's going to be. And we have both of the flyers in English and Spanish. And we try to reach out as much as possible. Places of worship. Now I know Christy is here. She has also told us about the stores, especially like for example, the Tapatia or the Palenque. Those are important places where we can reach out. Hopefully, I have talked to a few pastors of community. I'm Catholic, so I know all the churches here. But there are those other ones that are not Catholics, and so I try to go to those places of worship, and I'll also talk to some of the pastors in order for us to understand their group of people there, because I'm pretty sure that they trust each other there.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that a place to start would be in the schools as well, because we see a lot of families in the schools. We've talked about having a community resource center so that people could come to our resource center and we could provide them with the resources that they need. I think years ago, the school district had a grant and they did have a resource center where they address the needs of families and help to put them in contact with the support systems that they needed and the resources that they needed.
Thank you. Maybe one last comment. Hermes, did you want to say something briefly?
Yes, I had experience in the last week or 2. I tried to help one of the neighbors that he rents a room in a house, and he went to the YMCA and he was not able to get any help. And we tried to work with a couple of city employees, but we couldn't go any further with the documentation. And he just back off and he didn't get the help. So I think that that would be great if we can somehow find a less paperwork. His answer was like, if somebody wants to help you, we'll just help you. But we just hit a wall there. And one last thing is, I do live in Old Town, and that it's very hard to get information. All the other services are far away. Even Tamarack, the learning center in Tamarack is far away. Everything is far away for us. So having a community center on Linden, it'd be ideal to put a billboard or any activity to communicate to the community by walking, instead of driving. So I keep coming back to the community center on Linden Avenue.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about
Pam?
making sure that information is accessible, that people know where to go. So 7 and 8, it looks like, making sure that people have access. And Mike, did you want to jump in?
Oh, I just wanted to ask Hermes to connect with me on that individual. Let me try to help you.
Thank you.
All right, and I think with that, we're ready to go to our small group number 2. Is that right, Paige?
Yes, and I don't know if you wanted to invite people to just have a minute or two on feedback on community safety and policing before. I don't want to skip that before we move on.
Sure. Any comments on community safety and policing, the approaches that we talked about in the small groups?
I thought we were already talking about that. That's why I said number 3 on the policing should also be connected with the number 8 on health and social services.
Oh, I see.
Sorry about that then.
Great. I'm glad we clarified that. That's good to know.
And I make a point, there's no way of raising my hand, but I just want to make an observation because I think that it is really interesting. I don't live in South San Francisco. I'm actually an outsider. I work for the county. But what you just witness here is community raising the issues of what they need. And I really want to emphasize this because there's a lot of people here. There's a lot of us who are on the outside. And you cannot build any of these things without their voice. And I think that if there's anything that you can replicate this for the future, whether it is to the community safety advisory or whether it is through how do we inform of the needs that what the community wants, because they are better positioned to say why people is not accessing the services. They're better positioned to through peer to peer to be able to bring people to make those connections and support people. So to me, I just want to emphasize the importance of the community voice for the future.
Thank you so much, Gladys. I think that's a really important point. And I do think that perhaps the idea of combining some of these and seeing how some of these approaches are related. So the community navigator, obviously that's a person who has relationships with the community, has knowledge to be able to connect community members to particular services, and then could also bring back what I hear and what you're saying is bring back information in a way so that community information, community experience is reflected in the solutions, and just making sure that there's an ongoing feedback loop. Maybe that's part of what I'm hearing in what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kim, could I just add one more thing?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, just thinking about some of these like cross-cutting ideas that pop up in each category, like data, community voice. I'm just starting to think about like structures within the city that can enable that long-term, like a racial equity office or director, or like something where all of these initiatives lives and there's like someone accountable for it who can hold other people accountable as well, right? So just like something that's coming up as we talk about these issues that like don't really fit in a specific vertical, but are like super important and critical to make sure any of the initiatives within each vertical actually happens.
Thank you. And so that idea of bringing community voice and information and data sharing, and then kind of checking it with the community, hearing perspectives and finding solutions. And Bobby, I saw your hand up. Yeah.
Right. And I think we were thinking the same thought, Commissioner Kayla and I, because I think what she seems to be talking about is a sort of a chief diversity office. A chief diversity officer is someone who would be tasked with sort of an ongoing engagement and assessment of these efforts, and with a community engagement piece, and sort of a point person office where, so once this commission's work is done, right, someone will be checking in with all of the various agencies of the city to make sure, whether it's through a diversity or anti-racism scorecard or something, to say, look, are we staying on track? And so housing some of these initiatives in one central office would make a lot of sense.
Thank you. Okay. So lots of really good ideas here. Definitely food for thought.
And one quick announcement or request, just to make sure that anybody who is using the Spanish translation interpretation continues to have it in the small groups. If you could raise your hand if you want to continue basically on the Spanish channel, and Maria will translate that just to make sure that I flag you to keep you in the same room as Maria. So if you called in *9, or if you are on your computer, just raise your hand. All right. Same format for the second small groups. So I will be pushing you out.
Hi, everyone. We're back.
Hi.
All right. Well, I think we've got the rhythm down now. The same question, we're kind of focusing in on the same questions. The first grouping or cluster is education. There's a number of them here, so take a minute to look at those. There's about 5 of them. And again, we want to hear from your perspective what you feel like are the most important approaches to address racial and social equity in South San Francisco.
Well, I'll start if that's all right.
Go right ahead.
I'm going to dovetail on that last comment. I didn't want to say it in the large group, but Bobby, I agree with you. Although I'm not sure I'm ready yet to hire a chief diversity officer because those are expensive. But we need to design something that makes all of this sustainable after this commission adjourns. And so I know I strayed off this topic, but it was on my mind. That's something that we need to work on in the next few months. Because I don't want all this to sit on a shelf. All right. I like number 1 and number 3, although they're all great. Right now, I am concerned about distance learning, but beyond that, in South San Francisco, my impression, I need the data, is that we do have a problem with expulsions, suspensions, dropouts in school. And I'd like to look at that and say, how can we help with that? And then number 3, I think is, so number 1 kind of works at the current level, the high school, middle school level. Number 3 goes all the way to the beginning with universal pre-K and preschool. And every study says if you can get a child into some program when they're 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, their whole life changes for the better. And so for me, I'd like to address those 2.
Thank you. Commissioner Kayla, do you want to go next?
Sure, those are also the 2 that came to my mind. On number 1, though, I would like to be 2 things. 1, I would like to be more explicit about what this means. Does it mean, the whole Wi-Fi laptops thing, or does it mean like addressing underlying issues that could be at play related to race, related to equity? The latter is more of like a full systems transformation. This is like kind of what I do. So I'm very passionate about this, and like any one of like number 2 and number 5, like individual initiatives within the school, I think it'll be pretty challenging without having like a top-down systems change lens centering racial equity in our school. So I went on a tangent at the end there, but number 1 and 3, I would also agree with.
Well, that's an interesting point. I don't know that it's a tangent. I think it's a critical perspective to have a systems change lens to addressing social and racial inequities. And it's something that I definitely think we're going to want to consider when we look at all of them, all of these approaches, especially those that we're prioritizing, which are policies, which are programs, and which are practices. And I think that's when I think that the systems change really needs to come into that. So thank you for that. Commissioner Pat, it looks like you're maybe ready to speak.
Okay. Expulsions have gone down over the last couple of years. I think we only had 2 last year. When we saw that there was a problem with suspensions, we started a alternative to suspension program. It was supposed to start right before COVID, but it's kind of mirrors the alternative to expulsion program, where we're going to take students, instead of suspending them, they're going to stay on campus, and they're going to be matched with services that they need. And so I just wanted to say that. But in terms of, we're expanding ethnic studies. I think number 3, universal preschool and pre-K. You know, if we're looking at systemic change, I think we have to make that change at the very beginning on that base level. And from what I've read, it's, as Mike said, it changes kids. It can change their whole life. And then number 5, expanding free and affordable outside of school enrichment programs. I have seen, like, since the time my kids were little, there are the haves and the have-nots, and some kids just can't participate in sports or classes, or, you know, some of the things that a lot of the kids participate in. And I'm sure that it's the same type of thing. I think that can change their life as well. And,
thank you.
I want to say, Pat,
okay.
you don't show up on my screen. I apologize. We had an expert in the room on our current situation. So maybe looking at the total wraparound services for students of color, low income, so that they achieve greater success in the middle school and high school realm. But thank you for the data. Very helpful.
Thank you. Yes. Commissioner Bobby, you're on mute. We want to hear you.
The current status of Commissioner Pat mentioned, we are doing ethnic studies. We are expanding ethnic studies. So I think even though that may be what's happening, I think the commission should still sort of lift that up as something that we are supportive of. I'm happy to hear that it's happening.
We have them in our high schools, and we're talking about expanding it to our middle schools at this point. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Anything else on those? So there's a lot of agreement around 3,
yes,
5, well, 1 and 2. I guess there's a lot of interest in all of these, really. But again, just being explicit, right? Go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing to add is that, you know, I think the students should be involved in this conversation. And like, we should be responsive to what they are saying that they need as well. And that's sort of missing from the conversation in general. So just wanted to flag that.
Thank you. Okay, so I think, Paige, are we ready to go to the next grouping? So here we are in economic development and housing. And I'll ask the same question. What do you think? Maybe I'll start with you, Commissioner Pat.
They're all good. I think in most of these, we're talking to income inequality and where it starts. And so supporting residents of color and low-income residents and starting and retaining small businesses and helping them to linking residents of color to in key neighborhoods with disabilities, with careers and sustainable wages. I think they're all important.
Okay.
But it's a problem that needs to be addressed. I know that.
Thank you. Commissioner Bobby?
Is there a reason? So I like number 2. I'm wondering about the grouping of residents of color and low income residents in that item. If it were me, it would probably just be supporting residents of color, if that's what we're trying to do. You know, so that's would be my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. So to focus that on residents of color.
It should be focused on residents of color.
Since we're focusing on racial and social inequities. Any other thoughts on that? Did you want to add anything about any of the other approaches?
No, they're fine. I mean, they don't do much for me, but
Is there anything else that you would rather talk about or recommend?
Oh no, I am ready to move on to the next little grouping when
Got it.
That's time.
Any other comments about these?
I think I have a similar sentiment in that, in theory, these economic development initiatives are helpful. I don't think they will sustain any type of equity, whether it be racial or social, in the society that we live in, where Amazon can come in and outprice any small business, right? I could go on, but I won't. So that is why categorically, I'm not as excited about the economic development initiatives. If anything, I guess number 3, just because it plays into the capitalist system the least. It's just giving people benefits, I think.
So just to follow up on that, do you feel like there's anything in particular that you would add?
It honestly just, it wouldn't be a focus for me on the commission in general. Like if there's low hanging fruits where it's like, okay, people are experiencing racism when they try to open businesses and the city can just like say like, stop doing that, like, okay. But if there was any area, I would just like not really focus on this area.
Mike, it looks like you might want to jump in.
I'll just give my 2 cents. I do agree with Bobby that focus on color. And through all of this, I'm trying to try to look at this through a lens of racial equity, because a lot of these are really great ideas. And I'm trying to see, well, how does this relate to what we're really trying to deal with? So, but I do recall when we had a session a month or so ago on economic development, the huge disparity with Latinx community and how few actually own their own businesses compared with Asian or white. And that was something I did want to explore is why is that? And theoretically, I'm of a mind that, you know, if you want to avoid housing problems, buy your own house, own your own home. If you want to avoid being laid off, start your own business. That is so easy to say and really hard to do. So a lot of the problems that we discuss are linked to low wages. You I can't afford healthcare. I can't afford housing. I can't afford, a computer for my child. Yes, we can meet those immediate today needs, but on the longer path, if we can punch through there and provide good jobs, opportunities to rise up, I'd really like to do that. I'm just not sure how. Number 3 sounds a lot like things we talked about at the last session, which are making sure that residents are aware of these benefits, maybe the promontory program or something else. So it sounds like that one can be folded into some of the other initiatives, which are focused on getting the information to the right people in the right way so that they're able to take advantage of what's out there.
Thank you. Let's go to the last cluster then, since there seems to be interest in that cluster. All right. Give you a minute to read. Kayla, did you want to start?
Yeah, I think number 6 is one that I like. I would just add with preference for people of color and low income residents. Like to that, like it should just be specifically about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll jump in. I like that sentiment. That's gonna hit federal law. That's why it's written preference for people who live and work in South San Francisco. That's the only preference we can legally put out there and not be in violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act. Because white people used to use that on the other side. Say, well, only white people can live here. So, but we can definitely focus on income and say, people who have this income or below, or people who live here or work in South San Francisco. It's very frustrating because we have tried to put in some other preferences. And
I think I'm familiar with programs in South City where in San Francisco where you can build a new housing development and then move existing residents to that development.
Mm-hmm.
And if you build it in areas, there are ways to just keep that in mind without maybe being as explicit as what I was saying.
No, I totally agree with you.
An equity lens.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating if we build housing and then someone from San Francisco comes here and takes it, and someone from South San Francisco doesn't have that opportunity. It's very frustrating. But I absolutely agree with building housing. And it'd be great if we as a commission would support that, because there are people in town who are opposed to that. The NIMBYs who, they want things to stay the way they were yesterday. And it's always a struggle. And Pat, I am all about number 7. So we've had many discussions about building teacher housing, and I am a proponent.
As am I.
Did you want to say anything else, Pat, since you're...
No, number 6 and 7, and for the same reasons as Mike and Kayla.
Mm-hmm.
I think I like 6 and 7 as well. I'm wondering, how does 7 link to the sort of directly to the racial equity issue?
I'm not sure why we put it in this way, but it does allow us to recruit teachers, and it is a focus of ours to recruit teachers of color. We want more teachers to look like our students, and it's really hard because we live in an area that's so expensive. So to have something like this, it allows us to recruit teachers.
So it should probably be maybe it's more explicit that this is part of a diversity recruitment teacher recruitment effort, and housing would be part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice. Any other last thoughts before we give our debrief, our overview?
The groups actually have 5 more minutes, so we have a bit more time. We're not going to end them
We actually have more time.
until the other 2 groups are also have the same
I
amount
love
of time.
small groups
Sorry.
for this reason. I feel like you get through a lot. Yeah, so looking kind of stepping back, any big picture takeaways?
No. I will say a big takeaway is this is a lot of work because we have really covered some ground here. I'm hopeful that through this session and the session in December, we as a commission can kind of focus and be more specific in what we're trying to accomplish. Because some of the things as listed are certainly wonderful, but they're still a little too strategic, a little too high level to really drill down to, okay, what are we going to get done? And, how do we turn this really lofty goal into action, and what are those actions? And that gives me, frankly, as the city manager, something I can chew on and grab a hold of to get done. So
for me, that just been thinking about is like sometimes our biggest obstacles aren't necessarily things that the city has control over. For example, like funding for schools or like the housing thing that we just talked about. So just if there's a way to like, I don't know, just keep all of those issues that we're coming across somewhere, and I don't know how we can just like, I don't know, band together with other cities and like just make these things more of an issue, and instead of like just accepting them as they are and like working with the scraps that we have on per pupil funding, right? So just something else that I've been thinking about.
I like that, and part of it too, these are hard. I mean, if these were easy, they would have already been done. So we're trying to tackle something that's really difficult, and if we achieve even half of this, it'd be pretty amazing.
I guess I am also just thinking about the fact that your comments on economic development are lukewarm. I just wonder if, that's such a huge root cause of inequities that I'm wondering if there's other approaches that we should be considering.
I don't know if I would characterize it as a root cause of inequities. This economic system is broken. Like I did all the things I'm supposed to do. I went to a good school. I have a great job that pays well, still cannot afford a home. And so I think it's a bit naive to think we can just like build career pipelines and then people can afford homes and compete in this system that was built such that people are going to lose. So it's more like my philosophy on like economics in the country. And so us trying to address that, it's just like, yeah, I don't know. For example, if you focus on education first, then people can have more social capital to raise funding for their businesses. I don't know. It's just like, it's like kind of the last thing that I think about doing. And I'd rather have that be like the point than like than like suggesting a different economic development thing. So I just think categorically, I don't know.
Well, I'm open to ideas if you have them, and I think we have one last minute. If anyone has anything they want to make sure we talk about. And also think about, this is not the last conversation. On December 2nd, the survey is going to be live again. If you have additional thoughts, or if you know of community members that you really want to make sure respond to these questions or add additional ideas, this is a good time. So these are really challenging issues, and I appreciate that we have the opportunity to consider how to address them, even knowing that they are so so incredibly hard.
Right, and that's why I think going back to Mike's. So we were talking about the diversity office or something. Whether it be a separate office or whether it be someone in your office or whether it be, it seems like the issue is we don't want this to fall through the cracks, and we want some accountability built in to where the various agencies who have signed on to do these things will be checking in with someone on their progress, right? And so how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, hi everybody. We're having a very interesting conversation. Shall I start this time since we kind of were in that mode? So our small group had another kind of, I would just say kind of, thoughtful, engaging and just recognizing how deep these issues go and really what are the root causes, raising some of those questions, and how do you make sure that this work is sustainable over time. We were bringing up the idea of an ongoing racial equity office or officer or something like that, and understanding that that could be expensive or hard to do, but how do we keep this work going after this commission ends? How do we make sure that the work is, reported back to the community, back to, community voices and held accountable? So just kind of grappling with that. Specifically related to education, let's see, found that, I guess we talked about most of them actually when I look back at my notes, but 1 and 3 wanted to make sure that they're explicit again about and focusing on racial equity in particular, wanting to understand what those mean and could mean. And 1 in particular, perhaps making sure that there's wraparound services for that approach. And then 3, a lot of interest in number 3, so universal preschool, and number 5, making sure that services and programs are available for free or affordable prices. And then economic development and housing. Economic development was where we were having a little bit of a challenge trying to figure out what the right approaches might be to make a difference. And I think that's what I really heard clearly in our conversation is how do you make a difference when the system is so challenging. But certainly number 2, focusing on residents of color. Number 3, could be similar to other approaches that are focused on making sure that people get the right services at the right time. And then for housing, wanted to make sure that we had a conversation about number 6, focusing on residents of color, but that's limited by housing law. So linking that maybe to a recruitment strategy for teachers of color to be able to live in the area, and a lot of interest and agreement around number 7. So I think with that, I will pass it on to Nayeli.
Great. We also had a very rich discussion on both of these. On education, the 2 that rose up to the top were 2, expanding ethnic studies and culturally responsive practice, and 3, implementing universal preschool and pre-K. Commissioners mentioned the importance of learning early on in life, making sure that learning carries through the lifespan, and providing opportunities to lower income children and children furthest from opportunity. And also in terms of universal preschool, how that would allow families as well to work. In terms of ethnic studies and culturally responsive curriculum, what came up was, it's important to support children's cultural identity, building confidence and strength, and also would support family engagement in their children's education, as well as, just ensuring that students aren't falling behind. Was another one that came up for education, and that was supporting post-distance learning, especially with parents, lower income parents who can't afford pods, and there are widening gaps during this time. In terms of economic development and housing, the approaches that we talked about more at length were: one, expanding career pipelines, and two, supporting residents of color and lower income residents with to start and retain small businesses. And these were specifically, we talked about how Latinx small business ownership is very low, based on what we heard in one of the presentations, and that would actually addressing small business ownership would have lasting long-term effects in helping folks build community equity. As well as with career pipelines, we had a good discussion about, creating an apprenticeship program and having the city work with small businesses for pipelines around that. We also talked about number 7, which is leveraging school district assets to provide housing. There was conversation about it being kind of tricky depending on teacher interests and living where they work, but also concerns about teacher retention and making sure people can stay if they want to, as well as number 6, which is leveraging available land assets and public and private in terms of the community land trust conversation. Last but not least, we also again talked about how some of these approaches can be combined and simplified rather than separated out, and that a lot of these approaches are working and building partnerships and relationships with different agencies.
Thank you, Nayeli. And Sharon.
So my group, the commissioners were Commissioner Jeff, Commissioners Edith, Norm, and Commissioner Nogales. For education, we had a lot of agreement around approach number 5, expanding free and affordable outside of school enrichment programs, and the importance of having parent involvement in all of that. We also talked about how youth leadership programs could also support approach number 1, support low-income students of color in attendance and participation during during and post-distance learning. But what we talked about was how they could also overlap. Providing that service could also support the long-term goals of improved attendance and school participation. Commissioner, one of our comments was that approaches number 2 is happening district-wide through the school district, and how number 3 is part of the city plan, and that number 4 is actually going to happen. So how could we really move forward to number 5 and number 1? And it was discussed that we should define what these supports look like and how these supports could happen in community with the school district, with the city, even our local community-based organizations. How do we build supports around the stated need? So we need to look at that. For economic development and housing, something that was really a catch or a key was inclusion. How do we include for addressing housing security for our disabled and low-income families, making sure that everyone has access to housing? So when we talked about expanding career pipelines and linking residents of color, we also talked about how that builds into what supports look like. Again, support for low-income residents, clearly identifying what these programs and services are and making that connection. We also talked about the current need. So where we are now opposed to where we will be in January, what this looks like as eviction moratoriums will be lifted and how people will really be in crisis. So thinking forward more instantaneous response. What and how are we going to help people remain housing secure or address housing insecurity? We didn't get to dig deep into the last part of housing, so I will reserve that for our commissioners when they come out to speak, but we ran out of time.
Thank you. It sounds like in a lot of the groups we're hearing an interest in going a little deeper, which is perfect because that is going to be squarely what we'll be doing in phase 2. So happy to hear both what's rising to the top, but also an interest in going a little deeper. Okay, so Sharon.
So we are back at our public comment phase. Again, you are invited to share and bring information regarding the approaches related to education and/or economic development and housing. We are granting you a full 1 minute to share with us, but we would like to hear from you. So please raise your hand and answer the question. Which approach related to health and/or economic development do you think is important to addressing racial and social equity here in South San Francisco?
And as we're waiting for the response, to see if folks are interested, how, Hermes, Commissioner Hermes, you asked me how to raise your hand. Was that for you or for somebody else?
Well, I'm looking at the window. I don't see that option. Like in the previous meetings, I used to see the option to raise, you know.
That's a good question.
It seems that, and apologies for this, to do the breakout rooms, we had to switch the type of Zoom meeting that we're running. And so it went away for anyone who's a co-host, which is all of the commissioners. So that's why we just didn't realize it until, unfortunately, we were live, that y'all couldn't raise your hands, but the public or anyone who's not a co-host can.
Can that be fixed for the next meeting?
It likely depends upon if we do more small groups or not, is the question.
Every day there's a new Zoom challenge as much as we practice. Okay, let's see. So looking at participants, are there any hands raised?
Not seeing any.
We're really interested in hearing what you all have to say about the approaches and the small groups.
And I hadn't seen some hands raised earlier, so I do know it's something that people can do. There we go. Olga, I believe.
Yes, 1 minute is just not enough for me, to be honest. Is there an email that you could provide, please? And I would, my last comment, I was scatterbrained, my thoughts were everywhere. So I wanted this opportunity to ask for an email if that's possible.
Absolutely. We have an email that is quickly going to be, here it is now. So the email is SSF, racial, social, equity at ssf.net. And I think it's a good opportunity to reiterate what you're saying. I know we're all kind of limited with time that we can speak, but sometimes it's easier to sort of just take a minute and write down your thoughts or your experiences or additional approaches. We're checking this email to see what else we need to be thinking about and talking about.
Thank you so very much. I totally respect the 1 minute. I totally respect that. It's just that I know my community better than, being raised and lived there all my life, plus raising my children there. And I think I could provide some, valuable feedback, from what I get from the community and having been lived and raised, being raised there, so thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for calling in.
We would also encourage you to share that email for anyone else in the community who would have, some thoughts about what's happening in these meetings. That would be awesome.
Oh, great. No, I will. I'm involved with the Latino parent group with Edith and also with the African American parent advisory group with Dolores Piper. So I'll definitely share with them, plus my neighbors and everyone that I know. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Really quickly question. So can they write to this email in Spanish and somebody can receive it and translate it?
Yes, thank you for asking. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have other hands from the community? Well, Sharon.
So, because I'm hoping that someone else from community would join in, but if not, we're going to close this part and we will move into the commissioners, giving them an opportunity to discuss all of the approaches. But if we could give a few minutes for my small group, if there's something you wanted to add that was missed when we were talking about housing, you can take this opportunity to share that as well. So we're going to open it up to the commissioners. Again, we want to hear back from you. Any key takeaways from today's conversation? Rich,
Ron.
I'm sorry.
We do have a community member, Dolores Piper, who just raised her hand.
Welcome, Dolores.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can.
I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand. I'm not sure I still know, but I accidentally happened on it. So here I am. I realized when I filled out the survey that I actually prioritized all 26 items and took them out of their categories. I took them out of education, safety, housing, and I actually prioritized them 1 to 26. So now I realize, listening to you tonight, that maybe I filled that out incorrectly and I should have taken each subject. Is that right?
You did the exact right thing.
Oh, I did?
You sure did. So I'm glad you called in to ask, because we know, and this is a perfect opportunity to mention this and share it with your friends and community members, that we know that these approaches are, related to the topics that we started with, but they're also interrelated, and we also know that there's limited resources. So we're going to be moving into the December 2nd meeting, needing to look at how they overlap, which we heard today, look at how they might collapse where they do overlap, and then asking you to prioritize next week. And so or next month. So that, in addition to the survey findings, will really help, I think, you all make your final decisions. So Dolores, if you have, I don't know if you were on the call earlier, but we actually are going to open the survey again and extend the time frame so that you can get the word out. Everybody who's on this call can invite folks who live and work in South San Francisco to complete the survey, again in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. And then we'll bring the findings back to you in early December.
Well, thank you very much.
Congratulations, Dolores. I'm glad you brought that up.
It took a while, believe me, to prioritize 26 items, but I'm glad I did it right.
We're glad you took the time to do that. Thank you again for that.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly add also around the survey that each of the intro pages has links to all the other languages, and we'll make sure that the commission webpage also has. I think that it may already have the link, but if it doesn't, we'll make sure that's updated.
Okay. So I think we were headed into the commissioner conversation about all of the approaches, what stands out, what are your key takeaways?
That's a question for any of the commissioners.
I think this is great to kind of have a overall big conversation about these approaches. Is that what we're calling them, approaches? That we came up with, what, 26 of these, or just all of this, and then we're we all have different opinions, but we're all trying to get to the point of trying to, do what we think is right. And all of these are great. I think it's going to be really interesting to kind of see what the community's take on is. But I think this is a great step forward in what we're trying to do.
And I don't really think also that they have to be in a bucket like for health and social services, because some of them are interrelated and they have to be supporting of each other in order for us to make sure that there is equity.
I'm seeing some nods, yeah. Commissioner Edith.
So just to continue what just Commissioner Mark and Commissioner Sheriff Flores said, I think one of the things that really came out to me is like when I'm reading them, some of them have the wording or, the way that they're written. There are times when you see community of color, there's times when you see low income, there's times when you don't. So I think just for us, as we're just discussing, I think the main idea and why we're here is really to see those that are more marginalized in our community in South San Francisco. So just keeping that in mind on every time that we make decisions on how we do this. And most importantly, how do we bring the voices of those who are actually being affected by this solutions that we're trying to bring? Because if I see into who the commissioners are in this group, I think in a way we all have some kind of privilege, right? We have a voice right now. We have probably economic situation where we can be here and talk about this is what we think is right, or this is what we think it should happen. But in reality, as the people who are going through this, like how do we bring those voices and how do we really connect? And before the commission makes those decisions, how do we really go out and bring them to the table so that they can really express what they're going through in South San Francisco? Because this is specifically for South San Francisco and community members who live and reside here, for many years. And I think it's important to see what is it that is preventing them to move on to another level of where, again, I consider myself to be privileged to have what I have in South San Francisco. So therefore I see how can we bring and elevate those residents in our city.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Edith. Other big picture takeaways?
Commissioner Norm?
Yes, I do have, I do like the process. It was good getting together in groups and smaller entities so we're able to really discuss things, a lot more information. So I found it very positive drill. I hope the other groups felt the same way. If I could make one suggestion when we are doing this groups in the future, that we have like a little preamble or warning that we'll be cutting off, because on the last section altogether, we had just started, I'm out. So I'm sure there was some good content there. So we have like a 2-minute warning or so the facilitators can say, hey, wrap it up. Yeah.
Noted. My apologies.
Thank you. But it was very good drill today.
Thank you. Definitely. Other ideas?
It's just, I have a question. I just want to emphasize what Edith said about, in terms of process, what is your process to get more people who is affected by these propositions, their input, to make sure that we are heading in the right direction? And I know that a lot of these propositions came from previous work that it was done, but as these evolve, hopefully they change and we narrow them and we, how do we get that input?
Well, I think one maybe answer to that is we have the survey that's going to be live. And I hope that you all being members, here either as community members or as commissioners, will have the opportunity to make sure that the folks that you're thinking about as you're talking, the community members who are most affected by racial and social inequities are filling the survey out. There's also an option for additional approaches in that survey. And so I think that's one part, one opportunity, one data point that, one way that people can provide input for this process. And I think it will help in the prioritization in this next phase to understand what, who did we hear from? What did that population say? We're hoping that will give you a little bit more information to help prioritize. And maybe there's additional ways that we should consider reaching out to folks. Yeah, Edith.
So I worry that everything is online again. So everything, yes, you have the survey, but I do know that there are families who are a little intimidated about responding to, or even just accessing something that is online or websites or surveys like this. So I wonder if there's going to be any opportunity or ways to have it also printed out and distributed somehow, somewhere in the city where those needs, because we had colors in the maps where we knew that those disproportionalities were happening. So I wonder if in order to, like Commissioner Gladys said, to hear the voices of those who are most in need, one of the proposed ideas here was about the promotores or the face-to-face or one-to-one. How could we, and I know we have a member here who's in the public who's been delivering some flyers. She was telling me that she's spending her own money to make copies, printing and going around Old Town. So support like that, I think it will be important to prioritize so that we are really reaching out to those voices that might not be either comfortable using the computer to respond to the surveys, or again, just even filling it out, because those most in need sometimes, even if it's in their own language, is hard to understand and respond to a survey. But if it's printed out and people can support, I think that will be helpful.
Commissioner Edith, maybe we could touch base offline after this meeting just to find out more about different ways to distribute a survey. I think using existing ways that people are already moving around the city right now would be a possibility. It's a little tricky in the times of the pandemic, but I definitely hear what you're saying.
And just to add to that, when we had our census, there was several who spoke Spanish and went around the city and knocking on doors and do it in Spanish.
Yeah.
And supporting people to fill out the census. So that's the approach that I'm thinking about. Even though we were in the pandemic, it was possible to do it. So I think in this case, if we really want to hear the voices of that people, we can just copy the same approach that was taken for the census.
We will definitely discuss that. Thank you so much. Paige.
Just want to add also that I know a few commissioners have suggested or emphasized kind of the importance of ongoing community engagement and ongoing conversations with community members who are burdened by inequities or kind of most impacted. And I think that this, this survey before December 2nd's meeting will be limited, and we know that it's going to be limited in terms of how many people can participate and how. And at the same time, it is intended to inform the commission's decisions in December. It's not going to be the ultimate decider. It's really information for commissioners. And I think that there's a lot of interest in continuing to get community input once the approaches are prioritized or as they become more specific and fleshed out.
Well, and Kim, if I could add something to that about the communication style.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have been talking about integrating ways to get that type of feedback, not just with the survey, and not only through phase 2, but going beyond, to the other phases, as well as ways to integrate into the implementation phase. Once decisions are made about ways to proceed, to have, once again, community voices and information from the communities that are impacted as implementation is being investigated, studied, and reviewed. So
it's very important. Yeah, it's very important to hear from our stakeholders because this is really for everybody.
Will we
Yes,
be able to see the survey results by race, age, where they live in the city?
Yeah, 'cause that's why we
that's how
asked
it
those
is.
demographic questions at the beginning, so we could report that information to you. Yeah. Well, we're nearing our closing hour. I think we got a good kind of summary from the small groups, each one. I don't know if there was anything that anyone felt like they wanted to reiterate or underline the importance of as we're kind of closing down this phase, the information gathering phase. Any other final thoughts about these approaches?
I would like to hear from other commissioners. I would like to hear more from Commissioner Hermes, Commissioner Bobby Vaughn. Key takeaways.
I'm still looking for to raise my hand. Can you see me? It worked. Okay. Thank you for the small groups. Very good progress. I think that's a show of equity already. We are getting equals now. And I've been involved in the community for about 6 years. And we as a group, we work very hard as a HOTRA and Friends of Old Town. And what we summarize is there is this communication between, and please don't take it, I'm not pointing fingers at all, but that's the reality. We lost the trust at one point, way before me getting engaged in the community. Something happened in the past where the community disengaged with the city. The trust, the four walls is being damaged. But many people like you all are here, are the liaison people for the communities. And I personally walk the streets, and it's very hard to convince people to come together, to join, to do these surveys and so on, many things. We haven't given up yet, that's why we're still here. But there is a trust, the four walls has to be reestablished. And it takes all of us to actually check ourselves. One thing that I notice is if you offer something as a city, you gotta make it happen. If you don't make it happen, the trust is gone. And again, it comes before our times. But this our job today. One of the many comments I heard that I feel connected. One of the comments from Commissioner Balma said, we gotta hear from the people, the voices from the people. Well, this is one voice. I do live in Old Town. I do have my neighbors with me. You're looking at it. And I agree with Commissioner Arias. I am privileged as well. I have a job in the daytime that allows me to have a roof and to be in front of you. But we are here to voice for the people that they don't have that opportunity. And for them to come to the surveys, to the pod, to the table, kind of reestablish the trust. And that means I encounter many hard conversations with some city officials. And I admire when, even though we don't agree on something, we still try to work together on something common. But I'm not okay when people that they don't agree, they walk away and they just disappear. But if we disagree and we keep talking about it and look for a solution, we'll definitely build the trust. And when the trust is back, all the community will be back. Beating ourselves. Example is last year, the chairman Nicholas was one of the people that she came to our neighbor without asking anything, just to bring a help, the flu shot. An amazing experience. It was very encouraging. We need more of those things. And the people came together. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hermes.
I think just following up just briefly on what Commissioner Hermes said, the trust comes through follow through, right? And so part of what we were talking about in our group about having some a place to hold all of these initiatives and to have accountability is precisely so that there will be follow through and therefore trust from the community that the city is actually doing what it says it was going to do. So it's structurally it's important to have these initiatives sort of publicly out there. This is what the commission publicly recommends, and once those recommendations are adopted, they're out there, and the city will be held accountable, and we need structures in place to facilitate that accountability so that the community can say, oh, look, they actually are working through this stuff. So I appreciate the comment from Commissioner Edmonds on that one.
Yeah. And that is also what I said during my welcome. I said that, the reason why we're taking a long time is because we can just say act, because, we have to acting without the infrastructure to support that and the policy to make those actions sustainable will go to naught. So we really have to make sure that this is sustainable, and this is something that is with a piece of paper at the end of this meeting.
So thank you everyone for, I'm sorry, Kim, but I just wanted to thank all of the commissioners for your final comments, and Kim is going to walk us through the next steps.
And I'll just reiterate that. I think that I really enjoyed having an opportunity to hear in the small groups a little bit more from everybody. And I look forward to that more in this second phase. Speaking of the second phase, I guess we are officially at 6:31 in our second phase. So again, we were in the information gathering phase. We're still going to be interested in hearing from community members through the survey. So please get the word out. You are the champions and the connectors to groups. And so we're looking forward to getting more information from the surveys. We'll take feedback from today's small groups and these conversations and do some of that crosswalking, I think, collapsing some strategies or some of the approaches as we've talked about, looking for ways to to be more explicit in some of the approaches, and then we'll bring that back to you on December 2nd for you to prioritize. And so I think with that, again, complete the survey. Our deadline is now extended through November 18th. And I really just wanted to appreciate again, I feel like we heard from a wide variety of folks today. I really appreciated how thoughtful and engaged you were, and we're going to be taking your input and creating something that will be, I think, long-lasting and focused on racial and social equity in South San Francisco, and that's what we were charged to do. So really appreciate your input tonight.
Again, thank you, everyone. And if there's nothing more to discuss, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.